The morning mist was just beginning to lift above the narrow strip of water between the island of Salamis and the Greek mainland when the first rams hit home. Dozens upon dozens of warships, sleek, low triremes with 3 banks of oars, surged forward through the gray light. Hulls scraped, oars snapped, bronze-tipped rams slammed into wooden sides with a sound like splintering thunder. Men shouted in Greek and in dozens of languages from across the Persian Empire as decks turned into battlefields and the calm surface of the sea erupted into chaos. This was the Battle of Salamis in the autumn of 480 BCE. It was a day when the fate of Greece, and perhaps the future of Western civilization as we know it, hung on what happened inside a narrow strait heavy with smoke, foam, and broken timber. To understand how those ships came to clash there, we have to step back a little. The year before, in 481, the Persian king Xerxes I had set in motion one of the largest invasions the ancient world had ever seen. His father, Darius, had been humiliated by a defeat at Marathon 10 years earlier. Now, Xerxes wanted to finish what his father had begun, the conquest of mainland Greece and the punishment of the city-states that had dared to oppose Persia. From Asia Minor, Phoenicia, Egypt, and beyond, he gathered a massive army and a huge fleet. Engineers built bridges of boats across the Hellespont so his soldiers could march from Asia into Europe. Supply depots were prepared, coastal roads were reinforced. This was not a raid. This was a campaign meant to crush resistance. To meet this threat, rival Greek city-states that normally quarreled with each other formed a fragile alliance. Sparta took command of the land forces. Athens, with its large navy, became the main sea power. At Thermopylae, Leonidas and his Spartans, together with other Greeks, had tried to block the Persian army in a narrow mountain pass. They fought to the last man, but Xerxes eventually broke through. Athens could not be held. Its citizens evacuated to safer ground and to the island of Salamis. The Persians swept into Attica, and flames rose from the city's temples. Yet the Greek fleet remained intact, and its commander in all but name, its real strategist, was an Athenian named Themistocles. Years earlier, Themistocles had convinced his fellow Athenians to invest in a large fleet of triremes, fast and agile warships powered by 170 rowers. Many had doubted him. Now those ships were the main barrier between the Persian navy and total Greek defeat. In the days after Thermopylae and the burning of Athens, the Greek admirals gathered at Salamis to decide what to do. Some wanted to withdraw farther south to the Isthmus of Corinth and defend the Peloponnese. They argued that fighting in the open sea against a larger Persian fleet was too dangerous. Themistocles argued the opposite. The only chance, he insisted, was to force the Persians to fight in the cramped waters between Salamis and the mainland, where numbers would matter less, and the Greeks' skill at maneuvering triremes in tight spaces could count for more. If they abandoned Salamis and scattered, he warned, the alliance might fall apart, and the land defenses at Corinth might prove no better than those at Thermopylae. Tension ran high at those councils. Themistocles was not a Spartan. The nominal naval commander was the Spartan admiral Eurybiades. Some Peloponnesians accused Themistocles of caring only for Athens. Voices were raised, insults were traded. In the end, the decision was still uncertain. So Themistocles resorted to trickery. Under cover of night, he sent a trusted servant in a small boat across the water to the Persian lines. This envoy carried a message for Xerxes, claiming that Themistocles secretly supported the Persians and that the Greeks were on the verge of fleeing Salamis. If the great king struck immediately and blocked the exits to the strait, he was told, he could trap and destroy the entire Greek fleet at once. Xerxes, eager for a decisive victory, believed what he wanted to hear. During the night, he ordered parts of his vast navy to move into position. Ships rowed to block the southern exit from the strait. Others began to close in at the eastern end. By dawn, the Greek fleet was effectively boxed in, with no easy way to escape. This was exactly what Themistocles had hoped for. With all routes closed, even the admirals who had wanted to withdraw had no choice now but to fight where they were, in the narrow waters off Salamis. As the sky began to lighten, the Greeks prepared their ships. On the beaches and simple docks of the island, crews loaded water jars, spears, shields, and provisions. Rowers took their benches on 3 levels inside the hulls, gripping oars worn smooth from practice and earlier skirmishes. Marines, heavily armed soldiers who would fight on the decks, checked their armor and tightened straps. Priests poured libations to the gods into the sea, and prayers were murmured. Across the water, on the mainland side, the Persian fleet formed up in impressive lines. Phoenician ships of Sidon and Tyre, renowned sailors of the eastern Mediterranean, formed one wing. Ionian Greeks serving under Persia formed another. Egyptians, Cilicians, and other subject peoples stood ready. On shore, thousands of soldiers watched from their camps. Somewhere above them, on a hillside with a clear view of the strait, Xerxes had a throne set up so he could watch the battle like a grim spectator in a vast theater. Themistocles and the Greek admirals formed their own line of battle. Triremes from Athens, Corinth, Aegina, Sparta, and other cities stretched across the mouth of the strait. Their numbers were smaller than the Persians, but the terrain was on their side. At first, there was a strange stillness. Then a signal went up from the Greek flagship, a raised cloak, a flashed torch, a trumpet's call. Oars dipped into the water in unison. The Greek fleet began to move. They advanced not into open water, but deeper into the bottleneck between Salamis and the Attic coast. The Persians, seeing this, rowed forward to meet them, confident that their greater numbers would simply crush the Greeks by sheer weight. But as the Persian vanguard pushed in, their lines began to compress. The wide spaces they were used to maneuvering in narrowed. Ships crowded together, oars overlapped and tangled. Commands shouted on one deck were drowned out by noise from another. The Greeks, by contrast, had trained to fight in tighter spaces. Their helmsmen knew every rock and reef. Their captains had studied the currents and winds of this channel. As the gap between the fleets shrank, their chances increased. At the crucial moment, Greek triremes picked up speed. Rowers leaned back and then drove their oars with all their strength. Bronze rams at the bows sliced through waves, aimed not at the fronts of enemy ships, but slightly to the side, at the weaker sections of hull just below the waterline. When a ram found its mark, the impact was devastating. The pointed bronze beak punched into planks, splintering them into jagged fragments. The shock shuddered through both vessels, throwing sailors and marines to their knees. Water rushed into the Persian hull as Greek oars backed water to pull free before the enemy ship could drag them down. All around, similar scenes played out. Some Persian ships tried to turn and meet the attacks, but tight space and panic turned maneuver into chaos. Ships collided with each other, oars broke against hulls or were sheared off entirely. Cries of confusion and rage rose above the thunder of rams and the crack of breaking wood. On many decks, the battle came down to hand-to-hand combat. Marines from each side leaped or were thrown onto neighboring ships. Spears clashed against shields, swords hacked at limbs and armor. Archers tried to find clear shots amid the tangle. Javelins arced from one rocking platform to another. A single ship might become the scene of a dozen separate duels. From his throne on the hillside, Xerxes watched as his carefully arrayed fleet dissolved into a swirling melee. At first, he may have smiled to see so many of his ships in action, But as time passed, the pattern became clear. Greek vessels, though fewer, were punching holes in his lines, creating pockets of trapped ships that could neither advance nor retreat. Here and there, Persian captains tried to pull back, only to find their escape routes blocked by their own allies. In the crush of the strait, signals could not easily be seen or obeyed. The very greatness of the Persian fleet had become a liability. Among the Greeks, discipline and tactics began to tell. Ships that had rammed and backed away circled, looking for new targets. Helmsmen used eddies and currents to swing around hulks and broken masts. Veteran Athenian crews who had trained for years in these very waters found their sea legs amid the battle's fury. As the sun rose higher, more and more Persian ships began to sink or drift, rudders broken, decks aflame from spilled pitch or flaming arrows. Some crews abandoned ship, throwing down their weapons to dive into the sea. Some tried to swim to shore or to the safety of other vessels. Many did not make it. The narrow waters between Salamis and the mainland grew thick with wreckage and bodies. For Xerxes, watching from above, the sight was both incredible and horrifying. His navy, a symbol of imperial power assembled from across his empire, was being torn apart in front of him by a coalition of small Greek city-states that his advisors had dismissed as insignificant. Greek ships, too, were lost that day. It was not a one-sided slaughter. But as the hours passed, patterns of movement showed the truth. More intact hulls still flew Greek flags and city emblems. More half-sunk wrecks and burning hulks belonged to Persia. At some point, the Persian line broke in more than just small pockets. Surviving ships began to pull away from the main fight, seeking the wider waters beyond the strait. The Greeks pursued as far as they dared, ramming and boarding stragglers, but they did not abandon their advantage by rushing into open sea, where Persian numbers could still be dangerous. By midday or afternoon, the battle was effectively decided. Smoke rose in dark columns. The surface of the strait was a graveyard of oars, shields, helmets, and lifeless forms drifting listlessly on the current. Seabirds circled above, already beginning their work. On the slopes above, the mood in the Persian camp shifted from confidence to anger and fear. Xerxes, who had expected to watch a decisive victory, now saw his navy shattered. Accounts from Greek sources describe him raging, punishing some of his own commanders for supposed cowardice, and ultimately realizing that his position in Greece was far weaker than it had been that morning. Strategically, the consequences of Salamis were enormous. Xerxes still had a massive army on land, but without secure control of the sea, supplying that army deep in enemy territory became much more difficult. The risk of further setbacks grew. As months passed and winter approached, the great king decided to withdraw the bulk of his forces back to Asia, leaving a smaller army under his general Mardonius to continue the campaign. That army would itself be defeated the following year at Plataea. For the Greeks, Salamis was more than just a battle won. It was a proof of concept, a demonstration that naval power, intelligently used, could check even the greatest empires. It vindicated Themistocles' risky strategy of staying to fight in the strait, and it saved the fragile experiment of Greek freedom, of city-states governing themselves in a world dominated by kings. In the months and years after the battle, Athenians and their allies began to shape the memory of Salamis. In the agora, veterans told younger men about the ramming of enemy ships, the sights and sounds of fighting on heaving decks, the terror of seeing water rush in at their feet. Poets composed verses about the clash of triremes and the sight of Xerxes watching helplessly from shore. Dramatists like Aeschylus, who had fought in the Persian wars himself, wrote plays that brought the Persian court's shock and grief to Athenian audiences. Monuments were erected, listing the city-states that had contributed ships to the victory. Themistocles was honored, though his later career would be marked by exile and suspicion. For all his brilliance, Greek politics remained as ruthless as Greek warfare. Centuries later, writers and artists still returned to Salamis. They saw in it a story about cunning versus might, about the advantages of home terrain, and about how unity in the face of danger can overcome internal quarrels, at least for a time. Today, the waters around Salamis look very different. Modern ships, ports, and industrial sites line parts of the shore. The exact positions of the ancient fleets are still debated. Underwater archaeologists have searched for remains of triremes and battle debris, and while the wooden hulls have long since rotted away, occasional finds, a metal ram here and anchor or weapon there, hint at the events of that distant morning. Historians combine ancient texts, geology, and naval engineering to model how triremes would have moved in those currents and winds, where ships could have realistically turned or rammed, and how the Persians might have become entangled in their own numbers. Maps and diagrams in books and classrooms try to give shape to the chaos, with arrows and colored blocks representing fleets that once were made of human beings sweating at oars and gripping wet planks under their bare feet. When people today speak about battles that saved a civilization, Salamis is often one of the examples they have in mind. Without it, Persian control over the Aegean might have tightened, Athens's rise as a naval and cultural power might have been stunted, and later flowering of classical Greek philosophy, drama, and politics could have taken a very different path. Of course, history is rarely that simple. Many forces, many choices, and many unknowns shaped the world after 480 BCE. But on that misty morning in the Straits of Salamis, when hundreds of triremes crashed together in a deadly dance of wood and bronze, a turning point was reached. A small alliance of quarrelsome city-states had faced down the navy of an empire. In the cramped, dangerous waters between an island and a burned-out city, they had won a victory that would echo through the centuries.